The EFF staged a protest today outside the Moroccan embassy demanding the decolonization of Western Sahara. Protesters say that Morocco should stop its occupation of Western Sahara and the territory should be governed independently. Located in the northwest coast of Africa, the territory of Western Sahara has been occupied by Morocco since 1975. Attempts by the UN at organizing a referendum have failed, and Morocco continues to occupy 80% of the territory. The EFF's Secretary General Goodrich Gardi said that the Moroccan embassy would be removed from South Africa if the EFF was in charge of government.
Hence, today we find ourselves here at the gates of the most reactionary African colonizer. The people of Western Sahara fought the Spanish colonizers, the Spanish imperialists in the 18th and 19th centuries. They defeated them and they left the land of the people of Western Sahara. Some other useless African countries came in and took advantage of the peaceful people of Western Sahara and annexed their land. Their embassy does not belong in the soil of the people of South Africa. The EFF government is going to close this embassy come 2019 election when we take over from the ANC. We have come here today to express our outrage that a fellow African country can be a colonizer of another African country.
Thanks everyone, this is African Esquire TV. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. I want to talk about some things that's going on the African continent in regard to Israel. If you don't know, Israel has a very complicated history with Africa, and a lot of that has been adversarial. I would actually say all of it has been adversarial when it comes to African interests versus the Israeli interests. Even in the original, right now we have the Organization of African Unity, but before it was the Organization of Afro-American Unity. They were very clear, the leaders who gathered together, the Pan-Africanist leaders, they all came together and said that we are going to fight Zionism. Zionism is the belief that the state of Israel that says that we're going to occupy Palestinian territory against international laws, against the decrees of the international sphere, against the United Nations, for example. We're still going to occupy Palestinian land illegally. That is Zionism. And the belief is that we can justify it by saying that, well, the Jews in the Bible lived here, and therefore we're going to claim this as our homeland. Of course, we should know by now that a lot of time has passed since the Hebrews in the Bible actually occupied this territory. And the people who are indigenous to this territory at this point are the Palestinians. It's not the people who came, the state of Israel was not formed until 1948. So that's just a little back history so that you understand that the conflict between Palestine and Israel, it's been a long conflict and it's been a drawn out conflict. And Africans took the stance whenever they formed the Organization of African Unity that this is not right, that for the Israelis to occupy Palestinian territory, that is something that threatens African freedom, which is understandable when you think about South Africa, for example. South Africa was a country that was occupied and still is occupied by Europeans, and it was an apartheid system the same way that Israel and the Palestinians have an apartheid situation where they occupy Palestinian territory. It's also important to know that Israel has always been on the side against African liberation. When you look at South Africa, Israel was supporting the South African regime. A lot of times we find out that Israel was supporting the occupation of African lands. This is something that we find out through history or we find out in modern time. And today I'm going to talk about something that's happening that we're finding out about right now. Now, I want to talk about, looking for the story, sorry. So Israel has basically pushed the United States government to recognize that Morocco should have control of the Western Sahara. Now, that's the question we should all be asking. Why are they pushing for this? Why are they pushing for something on the African continent? I mean, if anything, you would think that they're more concerned about their own selves, right? Rather than concerned about what's going on in Morocco and the Western Sahara. So let me read from this story. Israel lobbied the United States to recognize Moroccan control of Western Sahara. That's a report that came out. Netanyahu is reported to have pushed the deal several times, which Israeli officials claim would be beneficial on all sides. Again, I'm trying to figure out, why does Israel care about what's going on in Morocco? Israel is reported to have lobbied the United States to recognize Moroccan sovereignty over the disputed Western Sahara region in exchange for Rabat taking steps to normalize ties with Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has a lot going on in himself. He's a very corrupt leader, but we're not surprised about people who are in power being corrupt. He attempted to push the deal several times in the past after initiating talks with Moroccan and American officials following his speech at the United Nations. After a speech in New York, Netanyahu is reported to have secretly met with Moroccan's foreign minister Nasser Bourita to discuss the proposal. Now, just stopping right there, the question is, why do these people have to meet in secret? Aren't these things that are democratic? Isn't democracy the way that we do things? Why are we doing things that are hidden from the people? Why are you meeting with the Moroccan leader but not with the Western Saharan people? These are questions that need asked. So why is Israel doing this? The reason is because, as we know, Israel is engaged in a conflict with Palestine and over who should occupy Palestinian territories. And right now, Israel is seeking to have other satellite countries inside of Africa and other places that are close to the Middle East in order to basically have reinforcement of their power inside of the region. And this is something that we should all be concerned about, obviously, because number one, the idea of supporting a colonist presence, and that is what Morocco is in the Western Sahara. It's a colonist presence seeking to enforce their own interest over the people instead of allowing the people to determine their own who they want to be occupied over, if they want to be occupied, or what type of governance they want to have. These are all things that are colonialism. These are all things that we have been fighting. These are all things that have been going against the interest of our people since our people encountered a lot of outsiders who decided to move in on us in order to enrich themselves. So this is a colonial relationship. This is something that we have been fighting all along, and we have to ask, why is it that the African Union is not stepping up and saying that we do not want this to happen inside of the continent of Africa? We know, of course, the African Union is a lot of times busy with other things that do not pertain to African freedom, that do not pertain to liberation. However, inside of this instance, this is one of those times that we actually do need them to speak up. Now, maybe one of the reasons why Israel is doing this is because the African Union recently has spoken up to basically condemn Israel, or at least condemn the United States plan to give Israel all this power inside of Palestinian territories, give them occupation of territories that were formally negotiated that the Palestinians would have power over. And it seems like they may be nervous. So I'm going to read another article. This is something that happened recently. The African Union leaders have rejected the United States Middle East peace plan during a summit. So it says U.S. President Donald Trump called it the deal of the century. However, during the opening of the AU summit in Ethiopia, it was ripped to pieces as the heads of the African Union said that it had been conceived and elaborated outside of any international consideration, and worse still, in the absence of concerns of the Palestinians. The deal would essentially create a truncated Palestine surrounded by Israel territory with pockets of Jewish settlements. One expert went as far as to compare it to a British Balfour Declaration in 1917, the very thing that started the whole process to words an Israeli state. Even stronger were the words of South Africa's President Cecil Ramaphosa, who in his speech as this year's sitting chair of the AU said, "It has been brought to my mind a horrible history that we as South Africans have gone through. The apartheid regime once imposed a Batu's Batusten type of system on the people of South Africa without consultation with them and with all the oppressive elements that the plan had. As I listen to the Arab League and as I listen to our colleagues from Palestine, it seems like this plan. Now, this is actually very important because, number one, the African Union is kind of reinforcing their history again. Like I said, the Organization of African Unity, they were founded with the idea that apartheid, that Zionism is wrong, that it goes against African interests. And I do believe that the fact that we have so many African leaders who are speaking out against this plan, not to mention, obviously, a lot of Middle Eastern countries are against this plan, I believe it's making Israel nervous, and they're trying to find satellite countries inside of Africa in order to basically feel more comfortable, not just rely on the United States, because we know that Trump, God willing, will be out of office soon. But not just rely on the idea that Trump might be out of office, but actually have other proxy governments that they can rely on. And that is what they're trying to do by appeasing Morocco, trying to enforce a occupation of a territory that is not theirs, and overall trying to win the hearts of certain people by giving them favors and expecting favors in return. So what we should be doing is obviously speaking out against colonization of our people whenever it happens, wherever it happens, and ensuring that we are not sitting by idly while the Israeli people try to set up proxy governments in Africa. Africa is always the one that's going to be used inside of these situations. Africa is always going to be manipulated. Africa is always going to be seen as a way to enforce one's own interests. If you know what happened during the Cold War, for example, you had the United States versus Russia. Neither of them should have anything to do with what's going on in Africa, but because they wanted to exert power and so that they had more influence, you had different countries buying leaders inside of different African countries in order to say, well, you're with Russia, you're with the United States. So these are all things that were done not for our people and not that we benefited from to this day, but instead to benefit outside powers, to benefit their ability to say that we actually have reinforcements in this area and that area. Because of that, a lot of people, African people, have died inside of proxy wars. These are the types of things that we should always be concerned of whenever we're being used by outside interests to actually to do what other people want to do for themselves. So I say this to say, hopefully the African Union sticks to this stance that we're not going to be used, but also hopefully the people of the Western Sahara are able to pull together and actually get allies and for their liberation and not be subjected to the will of others in order to be collateral damage for the Israeli government to maintain a apartheid state inside of Palestine and a Middle East agreement that basically would completely devastate the Palestinian people. So that's all I have on this. I'd love to see your guys' thoughts on what's going on. Were you surprised about the African Union stance? And what are your thoughts on the fact that Israel is trying to push for a satellite country, an ally in Morocco in order to enforce their own interests? See you guys in the next video.